Heal your emotional wounds and find inner strength. I used to feel like my past completely defined me, leaving me trapped by my own emotional baggage. For years, I felt like a ghost in my own life, just haunted by memories and feelings I couldn't seem to shake. I was moving through the world carrying this invisible weight, a constant ache that colored every interaction, every decision, and every hope I had. It was like I was watching my own life from behind a thick, blurry pane of glass. The world was right there, vibrant and full of possibility, but I was stuck in here, in this prison of my own making. If you've ever felt anything like that, I want you to know you're not alone. And that feeling doesn't have to be your forever. This is the story of my journey, to face those wounds and find an unbreakable strength that was there all along. My hope is that by sharing it, you can start to find yours too. This isn't about erasing the past, but about learning how to carry it without being crushed by it. It's about realizing that our scars aren't just reminders of where we've been hurt, but symbols of where we've healed. The weight of the unseen wound. For the longest time, I couldn't even name what was wrong. It was just a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety, a nagging feeling that I was somehow fundamentally flawed. So, I became a master of avoidance. I built my entire life around my wounds, creating elaborate routines and defense mechanisms to make sure nothing ever touched them. On the surface, I looked fine, even successful, but underneath, I was just exhausted. The energy it took to keep up that facade, to constantly be on guard, and to suppress the tidal wave of emotions I was so terrified of. It was immense. For many people dealing with trauma, it can feel like you're chronically unsafe in your own body. The past isn't just a memory, it's a living thing that can feel like it's hijacking your nervous system. A certain smell, a song on the radio, a particular tone of voice, anything could be a trigger that sent me spiraling back into a place of fear and pain. My body remembered what my mind was trying so hard to forget. It's like those unresolved emotions get stuck, not literally, but in the sense that they keep our stress response systems on high alert, showing up as chronic tension, tight muscles, or just that constant feeling of being on edge. My world got smaller and smaller as I tried to avoid all these triggers. I was living a half-life, a black and white existence, because I was terrified of the overwhelming color of my own feelings. The turning point for me wasn't some big, cinematic moment. It was a quiet, desperate realization. I was sitting in my car one afternoon, the engine off, just staring at my front door, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just a profound and terrifying emptiness. The effort of holding it all in had finally hollowed me out, and in that hollow space, one clear thought came through. I can't live like this anymore. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration. I had no idea how I was going to change, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that the pain of staying the same had finally become scarier than the fear of the unknown. That was the day my journey truly began. It didn't start with a leap, but with the simple, terrifying decision to stop running. The first step, to be still. My first attempt at healing was clumsy. I'd read about mindfulness and meditation and how they could help with stress. The idea sounded simple enough. Just sit there and breathe. But for someone whose whole life was built on frantic motion and distraction, sitting still felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The moment I closed my eyes, the noise I'd been running from would just roar to life. It was a mess of self-criticism, old hurts, and deep-seated fears. Sometimes, traditional mindfulness can actually make things worse if you're dealing with trauma, because it asks you to focus on bodily sensations that might not feel safe. That was definitely my experience at first. Focusing on my breath felt like throwing gasoline on my anxiety, but then I found some advice that changed everything. Modify the approach. Trauma-informed mindfulness suggests that if the breath is too much, you can focus on something else. The feeling of your feet on the floor, the sounds in the room, anything that anchors you in the present. This was a revelation. Instead of trying to force a sense of calm I didn't have, I started with what I called micro-mindfulness. I'd take just 60 seconds to focus on the sensation of my feet planted firmly on the floor. I'd notice the texture of the carpet or the solidness of the ground beneath me. It was a simple act, but it was profound. It was the first time I had consciously used my body to feel safe, rather than as just a storage unit for pain. There are a number of body-focused approaches with evolving evidence that use this idea of grounding to signal safety to a dysregulated nervous system. Slowly, I worked my way up to breathwork. I learned that slow, deep breathing can help activate the part of our nervous system responsible for rest, bringing a natural feeling of calm. I started with a simple box breathing technique. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold for 4. In the beginning, I could barely make it through one cycle without my mind rebelling, but I kept at it. Every day, I'd sit for just a few minutes, not to silence my mind, but to simply be with it, using my breath as an anchor in the storm. It wasn't about making the storm go away. It was about learning that I could be the calm in the center of the storm. This practice didn't magically solve my problems, but it gave me something I hadn't had before: a pause. A tiny bit of space between a trigger and my reaction. And in that space, I found the first flicker of my own power. The unsent letters, confronting the past on paper. Once I had a small anchor in the present, I knew I had to address the past more directly. Talk therapy felt like too big a step at first, so I turned to something more private, a journal. This wasn't a Dear Diary kind of thing. It became my sanctuary, my laboratory, and my confessional. The field of psychology has explored expressive writing for years, and it can be a helpful tool for managing anxiety and processing difficult emotions. I started by writing what I call unsent letters. I wrote to people who had hurt me. I wrote to my younger self. I wrote to the parts of myself I was ashamed of, and I didn't hold back. I poured all the rage, grief, confusion, and pain onto the page. There was no filter, no censor, no worrying about punctuation. It was just a raw, uncensored data dump from my soul. For years, I'd held all these emotions inside, where they had become this toxic, jumbled mass of pain. Writing them down gave them shape. It allowed me to see them, to name them. Research on affect labeling suggests that simply recognizing and naming your emotions can actually reduce their intensity. What used to be a monstrous, overwhelming feeling of wrongness started to break apart into distinct emotions. Okay, this is anger. This is grief, this is shame, this is fear. Journaling helps you see that what you think and feel is not who you are, but something you are experiencing. It creates a little bit of distance and perspective. While some early studies on expressive writing pointed to benefits like fewer stress-related doctor visits, the evidence is mixed. For me, the power wasn't in some measurable health outcome, but in the release. The act of writing was draining sometimes, but afterward I always felt lighter. Each session felt like I was cleaning out a wound, letting the poison out so that it could finally start to heal. The journal was a place where I could process my life without any judgment. This practice wasn't about dwelling on the past. It was about constructively working through it, so it no longer had a stranglehold on my present. It was the messy but necessary excavation I had to do before I could build something new. This process of writing was my second major step. It was private and just for me. If this resonates with you, I want to invite you to take one small, private step for yourself. Maybe it's not writing a letter. Maybe it's just writing down 3 things you're feeling right now, without judgment. Or maybe it's doing that 1 minute of grounding I talked about earlier. Whatever it is, I'd love for you to share in the comments, not what you did or wrote, but simply, I took a step today. You don't have to explain it. It's just a way for us to acknowledge our shared journey and cheer each other on. Dancing with my shadow, the deep dive. After months of breathing and writing, I felt more stable and grounded, but I knew there were deeper layers I hadn't touched. There were parts of myself, insecurities, fears, angers that I'd suppressed for so long I barely knew they were there. This is when I came across the concept of shadow work. Introduced by the psychologist Carl Jung, the shadow is a framework for understanding the parts of ourselves that we hide or deny because we find them unacceptable. This could be negative traits like jealousy or selfishness, but it can also be hidden talents or desires we were taught to be ashamed of. Shadow work, as a reflective practice, is the process of bringing these hidden parts into the light, not to get rid of them, but to understand and integrate them. It's based on the idea that the things we often can't stand in other people are just reflections of disowned parts of ourselves. I'm not going to lie, this was easily the most challenging part of my journey. It felt like turning to face the monster in the closet, only to find it was just a younger, wounded version of me. My shadow wasn't evil, it was just in pain. My anger, for example, was a part of me that had learned it needed to fight to protect me. My fear was a part of me that was desperately trying to keep me from being hurt again. This framework taught me to approach these parts with curiosity instead of judgment. So, how do you do that? For me, journaling was the key tool again. Whenever I felt a strong, negative reaction to something, I'd ask myself, what part of me is being activated right now? What is it trying to protect me from, and what does it need from me? It's a courageous path that can lead to some profound self-awareness. By engaging with my shadow, I started to feel more whole. I realized that by denying my anger, I had also been denying my passion and my ability to set boundaries. By suppressing my fear, I had limited my own capacity for courage. Integrating the shadow is about reclaiming all that energy you've spent holding things down. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming complete. It was about learning to dance with all parts of myself, the light and the dark. And in doing so, I found a deeper, more authentic kind of strength. The discovery of unbreakable strength. Through this journey of breathing, writing, and shadow work, something remarkable started to happen. The constant anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life began to fade. The world started to seem less threatening. I started to feel safe. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. The inner strength I found wasn't what I thought it would be. I imagined it would be like armor, something hard and impenetrable that would protect me from ever being hurt again. But it wasn't like that at all. The strength I found was soft. It was flexible. It was compassionate. It was the resilience that comes from knowing you can feel deep pain and not be destroyed by it. It was the self-compassion to forgive myself for my mistakes. It was the clarity that comes from seeing yourself honestly, flaws and all, and choosing to love that person anyway. Now, it's important to say that healing isn't a straight line. There were days I felt like I was sliding backward, days the old fears came roaring back. But now, I had tools. I had my breath to anchor me, my journal to help me process, and the self-awareness to ask what my shadow needed. It's also true that my path is just one path. For many, healing happens with the crucial support of a therapist, using evidence-based treatments like trauma-focused CBT or EMDR, which have been shown to be incredibly effective. Ultimately, I learned that resilience isn't about never falling down. It's about how you get back up. As the trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk suggests in his work, everything can shift once you start approaching your body with curiosity rather than fear. My journey was that shift from fear to curiosity, from self-rejection to self-acceptance. This strength wasn't something I built. It was something I uncovered. It was there all along, buried under years of pain and fear. The work was just about excavation, not construction. It was clearing away the debris so that the light that was always inside could finally shine. Conclusion. If you're here, chances are you're carrying your own invisible wounds. You might feel defined by your past, trapped in a story that was written for you by circumstances you didn't choose. I want to leave you with this final thought. You are the author of your story now. Many studies have found a link between having a greater sense of agency, seeing yourself as an active player in your own life, and better mental health and resilience. Healing is not about arriving at some destination where you are finally fixed. It's a continuous journey of coming home to yourself. It's the practice of choosing, again and again, to meet your own pain with compassion. It's the courage to be present with your life as it is, not as you wish it would be. The path isn't easy, but it is so possible. It starts with a single breath, a single sentence in a journal, a single moment of curiosity about a part of yourself you've long pushed away. The strength you're looking for isn't out there somewhere. It is within you. It is the quiet, unbreakable core of you that has survived everything you've been through. Your wounds do not define you. Your courage, your resilience, and your willingness to heal, that is what defines you. You have the power to heal. You have the capacity to be whole. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more on this journey of healing and self-discovery. You are not alone. Let's walk this path together.